course, no one is born with a label on their head that says refugee. And no one is born with a label on their head that says illegal immigrant. How do these labels get affixed to people? Right? We affix them to people. It's our decision, it's our creation. So I'm coming at this from a legal perspective, right? The word refugee has legal meaning. We decide who is a refugee. And when you talk about undocumented individuals in our country, right, the word illegal immigrant refers to a legal category. And in both cases, we create these categories, and by leaving people outside of lawful admission, by leaving people outside of the category of those allowed to come in, we create those who are not allowed to come in. So, for example, the word refugee. Right now we have a refugee crisis caused by people fleeing Syria and Iraq, and they are crossing borders into Europe, and they are a destabilizing force as they move across borders to try and save their own lives. The question is, can they be resettled? We have a legal system for the resettlement of people who are displaced. And that legal system depends on those people qualifying as refugees. Now, there's probably three categories of people who flee their home country. Now, the first category is an activist, and that is someone who is trying to affect social change in their own country, like in Honduras, trying to be a leader, affect social change, and by taking action, putting themselves out there as an activist, they perhaps put their life at risk. Those people would clearly qualify under our legal definition of refugee. If they were to flee because they had a death threat against them and they came to the United States, we would say you are entitled to stay here because you have a well-founded fear of persecution. That's one of the categories on the basis of your political activity. So that would be a way in which an activist, someone who takes the initiative, puts themselves out there, satisfies our legal idea of refugee. There are lots of other people who flee for their lives, not because they put themselves out there, but because they're born with a characteristic. They have a religious belief, or they're a member of an ethnic minority, or they're an indigenous person. And because of that characteristic they're born with, they become a target. They're not an activist, they're not trying to say change the world, but they happen to live in a culture where their characteristic makes them a target of persecution or discrimination. If those people were to flee for their life and come to the United States, they would probably qualify for refugee status under US law, because someone who has a well-founded fear of persecution on the basis of their religion, on the basis of their ethnic group, on the basis of their race, and even it's become established in the US on the basis of your sexual orientation, you can qualify as a refugee. So activists qualify, and people who are targets qualify. But the vast number of people who flee for their lives are neither activists nor targets. They are simply victims. They are simply people who are fleeing war, or they are fleeing random violence in a city where the drug lords have taken over, or they are fleeing natural disaster where there is no way they can survive because there's no way of feeding themselves or their family because of natural disaster. They're simply victims. And when they flee for their life and try to go to another country because of victim status, they don't qualify as the legal definition of refugee. And that is a big problem. And they are simply admitted or replaced and resettled on the grace of other nations. And so when you have a vast movement of people, the charity tends to run out. Now that's the sort of the Middle East Syrian situation. In the US, we have another situation, another legal label, another category, right? People say illegal immigrants, right? Well, in the United States, to come lawfully and enter the US, you can come in lawfully if you satisfy that refugee definition. You can come in lawfully if you have a close family member in the US who files a petition to bring you over. And you can come in lawfully if you have education and job skills, and there's an employer in the US who wants to hire you. And there's a few other categories. People, members of religious denominations can come in. There's some other categories, but those are the three main. What's missing? A legal way to come into the US if you are an unskilled worker. You simply want to work hard, but you don't have the education. You don't have the job experience, you don't have a family member in the US, and you don't qualify as a refugee, one of those targets or activists. You just want to work with your hands, unskilled labor. There is no legal way to emigrate to the US to do unskilled labor. And yet there's a huge demand in the US. Employers want to hire these people. And so you have Mexicans and Central Americans who want to come to the US, they want a better life for themselves and for their family, but there's no legal avenue. We expect them to simply say, well, that's it, fine, I won't do it. But of course they come in anyway. And that's simply because we have decided not to create that legal avenue. We could, if we wanted to, create visas, tens of thousands. We could create 50,000 visas a year for unskilled labor, and then let some of that labor come into the US if we wanted to. And that's part of what immigration reform is about. Changing our immigration laws to create this legal way for this category of people to come in, and simply by doing that, they're no longer illegal immigrants. They become lawful, just like that.